The Japanese government has adhered to an unwritten decision that Japan's military budget will not exceed 1% of the country's GDP. However, in May, Defense Minister Nobuo Kishi told Nikkei Asia that Japan never plans its military budget in line with GDP. The defense minister's remarks suggest that Japan does not want to limit its defense budget to 1% of GDP. Nobuo Kishi called for a completely new military budget to counter the Chinese threat. Not only the military budget increase, but also the defense magazine IHS Gen says that Japan has joined hands in formulating a new defense policy, which will gain momentum in 2022. In July 2014, the government of then Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe decided on a new interpretation of the anti-war constitution drafted by the United States after World War II. These decisions were passed by the Japanese parliament in March 2016 as a new law in the face of strong opposition. In Japan, many call this law the war law. They said that this could result in Japan being forced into a war started by others. The Japan Times reports that the law would allow Japan's military to join the war if the United States were to fight on the Korean Peninsula. Also, so far in the vicinity of Japan, the Japanese could have aided the United States. Now the new law can be used in any third country. In November 2020, Japan and Australia signed an agreement to protect each other's military members and equipment. According to the Japan News, under the agreement, Japan will use its military might to protect Australian resources during joint military exercises with Japan in peacetime and during Australian surveillance operations in the seas around Japan. Among the seas surrounding Japan are the East China Sea, where China has disputes with Japan over maritime and airspace. Aurelia George Mulgan, a professor at the University of New South Wales, writes in an article in the East Asia Forum, an Australian think tank, that in this way, Japan has gradually increased its military role regionally, and in order to do this, they did not have to change the anti-war constitution. Australia became Japan's closest ally after the United States through the agreement. As a result, members of the Australian military will frequently participate in military exercises on Japanese soil and in the surrounding seas. What's more, Japan has so far considered the United States to be its closest ally for its own security, but has now begun to consider other countries as important to its own security. Japan is already part of the Quad alliance with the United States, India and Australia, known as the Anti-China Alliance. Last June, Japanese Deputy Defense Minister Yasuhide Nakayama said in an interview with the Hudson Institute, a U.S. think tank, that Taiwan needs to be protected as a democracy. He questioned the One China policy of various countries, including Japan and the United States. He himself has so far called Taiwan a red spot. Nakayama questioned that future policymakers might question the accuracy of the policy towards Taiwan. Geographically, Taiwan is very close to Japan. If anything happens in Taiwan, it will affect Okinawa, Japan. He called on all to wake up to China's aggressive thinking and desire for space, missile technology, nuclear and conventional weapons. He also drew attention to the recent joint military exercises between China and Russia in the vicinity of Japan, saying that cooperation between Russia and China posed a new threat. That's why he wants to see a stronger United States. Ryan Ashley, a U.S. Air Force intelligence officer, writes in an article in War on the Rocks, a defense magazine at the University of Texas at Austin, that in recent times, realist-minded thinking has become more prevalent among Japanese politicians than economic-centric thinking. Most members of the then ruling LDP wanted to give more importance to economic relations with Beijing. However, they are now more interested in participating in the liberal international system. As such, Japan now seeks to improve relations with Taiwan. The Japanese do not think that improving relations with Taiwan will pose any new security challenges for Japan. Because the Chinese are already conducting large-scale military operations around Japan. For now, there may be no change in Japan's policy on diplomacy or security in Taiwan. However, the Japanese leadership's recognition of Taiwan's sovereignty and the Japanese government's willingness to protect Taiwan from China would be a short-term headache for the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese military leadership. It could even be a bigger threat than the recent nuclear submarine technology deal between the United States, Britain and Australia. A report by Nikkei Asia says that despite China's massive military buildup, it still has a geographical weakness. The islands of Taiwan and Japan control the exit routes to the Chinese Pacific Ocean. U.S. military thinkers are using Japanese naval submarines to control the middle of the islands. And Japan's recent deal with Australia, part of global Britain, also shows that powers other than the United States are seeking to use Japan to control China. Britain is also talking about deeper military ties with Japan. As a result of the agreements, the Chinese conflict with the West in Japan's courtyard will force Japan to get involved. In such a scenario, a change in Japan's position on Taiwan would increase tensions between Japan and China, as well as consolidate the West's position in East Asia.